Good morning. It's 9 a.m. on Tuesday, May 17th, and I would like to welcome trustees and staff to the budget hearing. We do not have any public comments or requests to address the board. With that, Bonnie, if you can please take roll.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this meeting is being held virtually, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Trustees sitting on the Board of Retirement and Board of Investment, Mr. Knox.
Good morning, I'm here.
Ms. Ginsburg. Mr. Kehoe. Mr. Santos. And I believe Ms. Ginsburg just joined the meeting. Yes. Okay.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Board of Retirement Trustees, Ms. Gray. Mr. Sanchez.
Good morning.
Mr. Moore.
I'm here.
Mr. Robbins.
Present.
Mr. Harris. Ms. Zapanta. Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Pryor.
Here.
Trustees sitting on the Board of Investments, Mr. Green. Ms. Greenwood. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly.
Present.
Ms. Jones.
Good morning, present.
Good morning, Ms. Sanchez. Great. Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Kryman, Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, Assistant Executive Officers JJ Popowich and Laura Guglielmo, CIO John Grable, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, Kevin Sakamoto and Kaylin Ung from the budget team. Staff and managers participating today include Roberta Van Nortrick, Alan Cochran, Bernie Buenaflor, Carlos Barrios, Carly Natoya, Cassandra Smith, Bob Schlofelt, Cynthia Martinez, Kathy Delino, Richard Bendel, Ricky Contreras, Ted Granger, and Vincent Lim. Trustees, please use the Zoom chat option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you are ready to speak, and now we may proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Bonnie. Before we get started with the presentation, Mr. Kryman has a few remarks.
Yes, good morning, trustees, good morning, staff, and members of the public. Just wanted to provide some background and a little framework on what the thought process was in terms of the development and putting this budget together. This budget really builds off of what we did last year. So last year, the focus and the concentration was to try to identify those areas that we needed to bolster when it came to our member services operations. So the operational units were given the highest priority last year. We added some additional positions to augment the existing staff in member services, benefits, and retiree healthcare. And you'll see in this particular budget, the focus has changed more to add positions in order to support the operations. And so I know that in the past I had mentioned that that our staff has grown pretty significantly over the last few years in terms of the operations side, but our support functions have not kept pace with the additional positions. And so we have quite a bit of ask on our human resources side. I know that the critical path at this particular point in time for the operations and for the organization is really going through human resources because we have a pretty significant vacancy rate. And some of the concerns that we have is the capacity issues that we have with existing staff. So, and then we have also positions that we were asking for in the IT side of the shop, where last year we put together an information security group and used positions in the IT section, and we're right-sizing that particular operation to reflect the positions that we borrowed from the operations on the IT side. So we have a lot of issues and we have a lot of projects that are in specific stages that we'll be more than happy to discuss with you as part of the presentation. So I do want to thank my budget team, Kaylin and Kevin, for all of their hard work. They've worked a lot of hours on this, and I think the budget process this particular year worked a lot smoother than it did in the past. And so we're happy with that. I also want to thank my division managers for all of their hard work and their thoughtfulness in putting their budget request before us, and also for my executive team for going through all of it and coming up with a budget that we think is reflective of what the needs of the organization are at this particular point in time. So there's a slide presentation that I'd like Louis to walk us through with JJ and Laura, and we'd be more than happy to answer questions at the end of that. One other thing is that I do want to thank Mr. Grable and Mr. Rice as well. Their thoughtfulness in not only their putting their budget together, they also were instrumental in trading ideas about what needs to be done in order to support their particular functions, but not only theirs, but also the overall organization as a whole. And so with that, I see Mr. Moore has his hand up.
Yes, I want to know if you could ask Kaylin and Kevin to show their face just so I can see who they are.
Yes.
Since they did all this great work.
Yes, can you do that, please? Kaylin.
And then they can go back incognito.
They
Okay,
do
I guess.
exist. We've seen them before, so.
Okay, all right.
I'm not sure
You're not
Kaylin
there,
has a
that's okay.
camera.
I thank you very much. Appreciate it. We put a lot of good work in, and Kaylin is a great mentor to me, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Wayne.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kryman. With that, if we can jump into the presentation slides, and I do want to thank Roberta Roberta for putting up the slides and walking us through driving the slides for us this morning. So Roberta, if you can share your slides.
Sorry, I'll be right with you. I lost the connection.
No problem.
Just so you all know, this actually ran pretty smoothly the last two times we walked through this. So
It did. I am so sorry. Hold on one
did.
second.
As she's working through bringing up the slides, within the budget hearing packet, you should have the presentation as well as the corresponding budget report in the event that we would have to just do a kind of a walkthrough. Okay, trustees, are you okay if we start the presentation? Oh, there we go. Perfect timing. Let me see here. Thank you, Roberta. Next slide, please, Roberta. So trustees, on the presentation, for the presentation today, we'll touch on a few items, our management philosophy in terms of developing the budget, some budget policies that drive some of our decision-making, as well as our process, and then getting to the, I like to call the meat and potatoes of our budget, and then as well as going through briefly the administrative and OPEB RHC budgets. Next slide, please. So one of the common themes that leadership has communicated is this concept of improve and simplify. We looked at that in terms of our budget process. We're looking at that in terms of our technology. You'll hear from JJ and Laura highlighting current initiatives and also future initiatives to really drive a lot of our process improvement initiatives and truly simplify some of our operations. And we've looked at that in terms of the divisional budget proposals, in terms of what they're focusing on as well, and what we're focusing on and what we want to resource as we go through our budget process. Some of the areas of focus, if we can go to the next slide, please, Roberta, is our technology. You'll hear case management as one of our big pillars in terms of focus efforts. Also, our workforce vacancy and recruitment has been a topic of discussion, obviously, in our board meetings. That's going to continue to be a focus of ours in terms of recruitment, hiring, onboarding, and reducing our vacancy rate. And more importantly, processes, looking at our processes across the organization, administratively, operationally, and looking at opportunities for simplifying those as well as improving them. Next slide. Now I'll pass it over to Laura. Laura, you may be muted.
Thank you, Louis. Sorry about that. Now that we've talked about our focus on our budget, we just want to quickly review the policies that establish the boundaries and guidelines as we develop our budget. So we are guided by SERL, which limits our appropriations for the administrative budget and defines specific exclusions. And we will refer to this difference as the difference between our budget and the limit as the unappropriated statutory appropriation balance. These funds are not appropriated as part of the budget, but the board will still have the ability to increase appropriations throughout the year if you deem it necessary. But they are, as long as we don't exceed that statutory limit established by SERL. So next slide, please. This slide just reflects our budget process. We're in the orange, the budget hearing stage, and the next stage will be bringing the budget to both boards next month. Next slide, please. This slide reflects the 2022-23 statutory limit under SERL. That's just under $172 million. Our preliminary budget reflects totals $127.8 million, and the difference, $44.2 million, is available for the boards to appropriate at a later time if you need to throughout the year. Next slide. This is a summary of our preliminary budget. It's $127.8 million, or 11.3% higher than fiscal year 21-22. The salaries and benefits are approximately $98.4 million. This is a significant increase of 12.8%. And our services and supplies budget is $29.4 million, up 6.5%. Before we get into the detail of our 22-23 request, we'd like to quickly highlight some of our accomplishments in the current year and the important work we're planning for the next year. So next slide, please. This slide and the next slide, I'm not going to list all of these, but they kind of highlight some of the technology work that we've been doing in the current year. So you can see between this slide and then reverted to the next slide, we've got several projects that we have been working on. Our IT folks have been working on in this last year. And those are for your packets, and there's details about cost in the budget document itself. And of course, we're happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. In addition, we also had to the projects that we have completed. We have 3 projects that are currently in process right now that we expect to complete in 22-23. That's the Truffle Accounts Payable project, our budget management solutions that's make this process a lot faster and easier for us, and our enterprise lifecycle management program. Next slide, please. And despite all of the modernization efforts that we have gone through so far, we are not going to continue, we're not going to stop evolving. In 22-23, we'll be working on 8 significant initiatives, technology initiatives, the most significant being the case management system. And JJ will talk more about that in a moment. And again, these projects are sort of listed in you have the slides as well as in the budget document itself with the summary and the costs. Next slide, please. And these are additional projects. So there's 8 in total that we're talking about. And then next slide, please. And now JJ is going to talk about our case management system in a little bit more detail because this is really our major initiative.
Thank you, Laura. So the technological improvements that Laura has mentioned are great examples of the teamwork and how that impacts of those projects are beneficial across the organization. Case management system is a perfect example of that. It's an organizational project that will take the entire LACERA village to implement, and the beneficial impacts will go across all of the organization. The project dovetails with our organizational philosophy of improving and simplifying our operations. And while we maintain our focus on doing that, we won't lose our focus on continuing to provide the highly personalized service across all service channels that we're known for. It has been a central focus of our efforts over the last few years, and specifically this fiscal year that we're currently in. LACERA has a very flexible pension administration system, but as flexible as it does not meet all of our efficient management needs for our member requests. Just one moment here, sorry about that. Across all of the divisional boundaries that those processes. And for those processes that also exist outside of our Workspace pension administration application. Case management will be integrated with Workspace, so we'll be taking advantage of all of our current programming and our business rules, the data structures already created to support operations, and also the familiarity with how to use the tools. It will afford us a greater automation so we can use customizable interface and workflow tools of the case management system itself to work more efficiently with our business rules and to support robotic automation to make processes more efficient. And finally, increased efficiency and greater transparency of our operations will help improve member services and the member experience through better management of our resources, better access to up-to-date information on the status for our members, and increased self-service offerings that we can provide to our members. Throughout the budget highlights, you'll see notices and references to resources being devoted to this project. For example, many of the divisions will be devoting overtime to development and testing and the rollout phase for phase 1 of the project. Our goal is to manage the implementation of the case management in a manner that doesn't impact our current operations. With the board's recent approval of Eccentrics, we are excited to begin our implementation of phase 1, which we are already beginning in discussions with the vendor. Phase 1 of the plan will focus on 2 member operations group, as we call ourselves, and one area from the legal office. These 3 phases were selected for the most beneficial impact of the organization to demonstrate the value of case management and improve our operations. The first payment is the first process that we'll be looking at. This is essentially the transition phase that a member goes through from an active member to a retired member and being placed on payroll. The benefits division processes all of these first payment cases, but just about each division in the MOG is impacted by the first payment process, along with our systems division. And that current process is a mix of manual processing, automated processing through Workspace, and includes checkpoints for quality assurance. Much of our disability retirement services operations exist entirely outside of Workspace application, and that involves a lot of manual processing and procedures. And so the phase 1 also focuses on our disability process, and it will centralize data, automate tracking, create the ability to do reminders, create automated escalations, and greatly improve the assembly of our board packages, as well as provide metrics so that we can see how we're doing. And then finally, the disability litigation is in the first phase. It's similar in benefits in terms of what we see for the disability retirement services. The new system will also help them prepare court-appropriate documents and case files, which is going to be a huge benefit to them. Let's go on to the next slide, please. We have been busy, and so the member operations group, as we like to refer to ourselves, has spent the last year focusing on trying to improve our member experience through innovation, simplification, and through gaining a better understanding of how we process member requests. What you see on the screen are some examples of that. While there are many accomplishments the past year, these are just a few of them. So I'm not going to go ahead and read them there, but I will say one of the big ones, besides the launch of our metrics, was the paperless board letter. That vastly improves our communication with the county as we move people from active service to retired service. Let's go to the next slide. Continuing with our efforts and the remainder of this fiscal year into the next, we have projects that are designed to improve our efficiency and our service. The death claim process, which we discussed in the last operations oversight committee meeting, is is one of those areas that we expect to see a lot of improvement on through a re-engineering that we've recently gone through. We'll certainly be bringing the disability online application to the Operations Oversight Committee to demonstrate what we're doing in that area. And then we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make our process efficient for our benefit staff in terms of the templates that they use. Let's go to the next slide, please. And of course, we're extremely involved in case management initiative, but on top of that, we've also got a member service queue project that we're working on. The member service operation, the member operations group has a number of applications that we're creating, which are helping to improve our efficiency in our operations. And we're excited that we're going to be expanding the retirement university very soon on LACERA.com, which not only provides more opportunity for our members to learn, but it provides different methods for them to learn. So, you know, we have text, we'll have multimedia, and that will really cover the basis for how members can learn about their benefits. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Thank you, JJ. So next we're going to move on to people. In 2021-22, HR stood out as a critical path for LACERA's success. We have had successes. We have negotiated a new 3-year agreement with SEIU. We're ahead of the county on that. We're very happy about that. We launched a new telework policy to allow the flexible and hybrid work environment. We've developed an HR recruitment plan to help align our organization priorities with our available HR resources. We onboarded a new core training class of RBSs, onboarding 25 new RBSs, which you know was our first class in COVID. So we had sort of missed a year, so we're definitely behind the times. And we promulgated 11 new eligibility lists. 5 more are expected by the end of the year. We've onboarded 32 staff members with 6 more anticipated by the end of the year, and we've processed 30 promotions. Next slide, please. Of course, there remain significant human resources challenges. We've got a vacancy rate hovering around 20%. We have very long and rigid processes, and we have a regional labor market that's constrained. We've experienced higher attrition. I think this is common among the county family. The trend is rising. The trend is rising, and we've got an aging workforce. We do anticipate about 30 staff leaving service in fiscal year 22, and that highlights the importance of succession planning, which really should be a priority always. We also are looking at how we can grow our staff capacity by adding resources to HR, but also looking at how we can supplement those resources with LA County, as well as professional recruiters and exam specialists. Next slide, please.
Okay. Yeah, this is Joe Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think Mr. Kelly is.
Oh, there
we go. So this slide just kind of highlights some of the things we're planning to do to address our HR challenges. We anticipate this being a significant pillar in our strategic plan process that we are undergoing right now. We need a transparent hiring plan so that all stakeholders understand where we are and what our plans are. We will be developing a recruitment manual for managers and our HR staff, so everybody is working off the same set of rules and everybody knows what to expect. Succession planning, as I mentioned, is going to be a significant pillar. How do we prepare LACERA for the future at all levels, not just at the very top? And then cultivating a workplace culture that reflects our values of equity and inclusion and diversity. Establishing KPIs and recruitment goals that will be established as part of a strategic planning process, but also communicated to our staff and stakeholders, and additional support for our human resources team. Next slide, please. In addition, we also have, we understand that the role that our investment division plays in our ability to provide our promised benefits through their stewardship. The Investments Division's strategic plan was approved by the BOI and includes these 5 strategic priorities. The preliminary budget includes resources necessary to work towards achieving these strategic priorities. And next slide, please. So now we're going to get into the first of our 3 budgets as part of LACERA's 3 budgets, and that's going to be our administrative budget. It will be our financial plan for how we will administer and fund the pension benefits for our members. So next slide. This is sort of a repeat of the previous slide. So in fiscal year 23, our preliminary budget is $127.8 million, or 11.3% higher than 22. Our salaries and benefits will be $98.4 million. That's up 12.8%. And supplies and services at $29.4 million, up 6.5%. And in the next few slides, we're going to talk about our assumptions and how we arrived at these figures. And as we do that, I ask that you keep in mind that we are preparing for a very aggressive hiring plan next fiscal year. We must reduce our vacancy rate to single digits if we are going to be able to provide the level of services that our members expect. And frankly, we are struggling to do that today. We are overly reliant on temporary staff. We would, and we want to get away from that. So we're asking that we not be constrained by filling every vacant position and giving us the ability to fill every vacant position that we can and not be constrained by our budget. Next slide. So this is a little bit dense, but last year we were asked to, for our current year budget, to actual data. So this explains sort of by division how we compare our preliminary budget for 22-23 compares to our adopted budget for the current year and our projected actuals and then the variance. And this really reflects the significant variance here is primarily related to salaries. And it's because of that vacancy rate, salaries and benefits, and the vacancy rates we talked about previously. Last year, you should note that we were very optimistic about COVID recovery last spring. We had just got vaccinations and transmissions were on the decline. And so everybody was sort of feeling optimistic, but we definitely had some continued delays. Next slide, please. In coming up with these costs, we made certain assumptions. So for salaries and employee benefits, we based the cost for filled positions on current actual salaries. Vacant positions are budgeted at the first step, and most are funded for only 6 months. We then assumed a 4% COLA effective January 1st, 2022, with retroactive costs incurred in 22-23. So that COLA becomes effective January 2022, but we don't expect that we will be paying it until 22-23. And then we also anticipated an additional 3% COLA effective January 1st, 2023, and funding that for the last 6 months or half of the fiscal year. For supplies and services, we looked at historical expenditures and then adjusted that for inflation. Next slide, please. So if we dig a little deeper into the cost drivers for salaries and employee benefits, we can see that our costs increased by 11.3%. We're proposing 6 months funding for 19 new positions. That's approximately $1.5 million for salaries and benefits. That's just under $1 million for salaries and just over $500,000 for benefits for those 19 new positions. We also are fully funding positions that were vacant at the beginning of last fiscal year, but that are either filled today or anticipated to be filled this fiscal year, and that's totaling approximately $800,000. We also anticipated COLA increases that impact salaries and benefits, merit and salary step increases, and overtime, mostly due to case management. So we're including about $200,000 for overtime for case management. And finally, $1.9 million increase is in our agency temporary staff. We have been using a lot of agency temporary staff to address our vacancies, and it buys us time so that we can continue to provide services to our members while we go through the process of developing exams and going through our civil service process And we anticipate continuing to rely heavily on temporary staff next fiscal year, but we do anticipate that tapering off as we fill our positions and reduce our vacancy rate. Next slide, please. So this outlines, this slide outlines our staffing increases by division. So management proposes a net increase of 19 new staff positions. This is a 4% increase over our current budgeted level of 474 on the administrative side. Of these newly requested positions, 18 provide internal support services to LACERA operations, and 1 is member facing in benefits division. And that goes to the emphasis that Mr. Kryman mentioned at the beginning of our presentation. 5 new positions are requested in the administrative services section. Administrative services is a catch-all support unit supporting all of LACERA and is responsible for budgeting, contract management, procurement, organizational risk management, including disaster recovery, safety, and insurance, facilities maintenance, records information management, including our document processing center. When this division doesn't have the resources it needs, the service to the entire organization suffers. And our goal is to provide better internal services so that LACERA can provide the best service possible to our members. We also looked at how the organization was structured, and we made it, it was the way it was structured made it very difficult to attract talent or for the existing staff to promote internally. So in looking at how we can be better prepared for the future, we propose reorganizing the division to provide better and more clear career ladders and to better prepare for succession, which will also allow us to provide better service to our internal stakeholders. Management seeks 6 new positions in human resources. This will include 2 supervisors and 4 human resources analysts. And this is so that we can provide appropriate support and for the recruitment and retention needs of the organization. We are organizing the staff in a way that a team of 2 will support 3 to 4 divisions and provide better customer support by fostering better understanding of the division's unique needs and by having these liaisons. And HR will, it's important that while this is a lot, HR has not received any new resources in more than a dozen years, despite very significant staffing increases across LACERA as an organization during that time. So this is now creating a bottleneck in the organization. We see that as the critical path to success as the organization. Next, we are also proposing a net increase of 6 new positions in systems to better support the incredible amount of technology improvements and projects that are needed to be that we need to maintain and to move forward. And we will want to point out that it's really only 2 new positions because we are proposing to restore 4 positions that were transferred to create last year to create the Information Security Office. And legal is also requesting 1 new senior staff counsel for the investment sections to support investments and commercial transaction work. And then the 1 position that is member facing is in member benefits, and that's a new senior typist clerk for the account maintenance unit to address increased workloads. And they have been using agency temp on a full-time basis in order to address this need, but the need is actually permanent. It's I think initially it was anticipated that might be a temporary surge, and it's turning out to be a permanent surge. Next slide, please. In addition to how many staff you have, it's ensuring that people with the right skills are sitting in the right seats is critical for making the difference on how you're going to reach your destination. So for fiscal year 22-23, we plan to restructure the administrative services division, putting groups of people together with complementary and related skills. Our CIO is also working on restructuring the investment division around strategies with the goal of fostering deeper knowledge and greater self-reliance. No additional staffing are requested for the investments division in this reorganization, however. And finally, the classification changes in our secretarial series, which was approved by both boards earlier this year, are reflected in our organization charts, and the salaries have been adjusted in accordance with the board's actions. So next slide, please. For services and supplies, we will be increasing the budget by 6.5%. And as mentioned, it's primarily due to inflationary cost increases. This slide highlights the most significant increases. Insurance for fiduciary and cyber liability are expected to increase, along with, we now have a new insurance broker services that charges flat fee, and it's not, those fees are no longer embedded in the premiums. We expect rent increases, although we do not have new space added into our budget. Common area maintenance costs are added, which is a new cost for us this fiscal year in compliance with our contract. Disability-related medical services reflect a change in our process and the number of cases. So we're seeing an increase there. Our strategic planning services, although we started it in the current fiscal year, we expect the payments to be made in fiscal year 23. Our information security software is now highlighted here. It's about $95,000. We expect our outside legal costs to increase based on litigation that we have pending or is in process. And we expect an increase for HR recruitment and testing services. And so we are using an outside recruiter for some of our unique positions that are at a high level. So our information technology officer, our chief information security officer, both of those positions are filled now with contractors. We'd like to make those permanent LACERA staff members.
So Laura, Mr. Kelly has a question.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. It's difficult for me to see.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So Laura, on this slide here, I want to make sure I'm understanding it. So this is the summary of changes, and they're all positive. So these are increases off of a base, but you don't cite the base. And then so that I don't know what the total is. So for example, HR outside recruitment and testing service, I'm assuming, I'm reading this to be that expense will increase $290,000, but I don't know from what to what.
That's a great question. I'll have to pull that information up for you in just a moment. So, but I think that's a, thank you. I do appreciate that question. And I'm gonna try to pull that up. I'm gonna ask.
Kaylin can pull it up while you're going.
Yeah, that's what.
So we'll get you the numbers before the end of the.
Thank you very much.
And we can refer back to any of the slides as we go along if any of you have specific questions or would like us to drill deeper. So
It would be helpful if the slides had slide numbers. I don't see them anywhere.
Noted. We'll make that adjustment in the future. It's an excellent point. So these reflect sort of the changes as we talked about. And then next we are ready. Next slide, please. Lewis is now going to talk about the summary of changes to our retiree healthcare and OPEB budgets.
Yep. Thank you, Laura. And then we'll pull, Joe, thank you for those comments, and we'll certainly pull the baseline budget and how that's increased from last year to this year. I think it's highlighted in a budget report by division in terms of last year's spend and the proposed budget for fiscal year 23. So I want to briefly summarize the retiree healthcare as well as the other post-employment benefits budgets for LACERA. Next slide, please. Before I go into some of the details within the retiree healthcare proposed budget, I do want to provide some context. I know we have a couple of new trustees. So our retiree healthcare division basically administers the retiree healthcare program for the county and our other plan sponsors. We support about 68,000 retirees, and our staff is about 30 to 37 dedicated members focusing on enrollment, plan information, plan carrier information, as well as customer service, for those 68,000 retirees that we currently have. So for this proposed budget, we actually have a decrease in our proposed operating budget for retiree healthcare, and the two big triggers for that is one, the way we're looking at planning our hiring. In fiscal year 23, we're budgeting 6 months for the vacant positions to allow us to have that bandwidth, that time frame to recruit. Also, or I should say this fiscal year, we've used temporary hires. So our goal is, as Laura mentioned earlier, we really want to move away from having temporary hires and really start focusing on getting permanent staff on board at LACERA. So between a reduction in the use of temporary hires, as well as the 6-month budget allocation for the vacant positions within retiree healthcare, you see a slight decrease in the proposed administrative operating budget for the retiree healthcare program. Next year, you'll obviously see that increase once we have our full complement of staff. Next slide, please. And I won't go into too much detail. This is just budget to actuals. Next slide, please. And then our other post-employment benefits summary. This is
Louis, I had a question on the previous slide, sorry.
Yep. I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
So this is unique to me because typically services and supply budgets are significantly less than people. And here we have a situation where the service and supplies budget is actually greater than the people. Why is that?
Yep. So with the retiree healthcare program, and we can dive a little bit deeper within our budget report, but we use services outside throughout the organization. So for instance, IT support, call center support, member service support. So there's a portion of service allocation that's provided to retiree healthcare as part of our just kind of normal, being a part of our normal operating structure. So as you look at and within a budget report, there is a breakdown in terms of where those costs come from. So it's really allocating cost from other.
Thank you.
So it's similar to a departmental service order of the county side of the shop.
Mm-hmm.
And then for our other post-employment benefits summary, so LACERA does manage not only ours, but the counties as well as, excuse me, I gotta go back to my slide here. The Superior Courts, LACERA, and then the county make up LACERA's OPEB structure. In terms of our budget, it's pretty flat. We're looking at about a 1.7% increase. And really, it's no other commentary there than to say it's a pretty relative flat number in terms of how we're going to pre-fund some of those benefits. And with that, we have our staff as well as some of our division managers readily available to answer any questions. We go to the last slide, please, Roberta.
And before we get to Mr. Moore's question, I see Mr. Kelly, you had asked about the change in recruitment, for example. So that went from $200,000 to $490,000 for the.
And then the idea would be with the 6 people you're hiring, the year after that, it'll go to under 100,000.
We would expect that, yes. We would really only be using outside recruiters for highly specialized, high-level positions.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, for driving through the slides.
And I see Mr. Moore's hand is up.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I just wanted to compliment you on the budget presentation. You know, as a budgeteer myself for most of my career, you know, I can appreciate a presentation that is a high enough level so you don't get diverted from the budget presentation goals of communicating information, and just the low enough so that you actually understand what's going on. So, you know, it's a delicate balance between how much or, you know, how little information you provide on subjects. So I was able to follow you pretty clearly on what the budget objectives were and how the budget was developed. I know the staff did a lot of work putting together these numbers and making sure everything foot and ticked. There's probably a couple of places where I would have added a little bit more numbers, but you know, I'm sure you'll get to that. The more budgets you do, you'll keep tweaking it and refining it. So I had about 3 questions, mostly around, well, they're all 3 around HR. And you talked about how that's a priority to get HR staffed up. So Are we recruiting for the positions that we need now? Have we started already? So that when we get to the fiscal year, we're getting close to being fully staffed for the fiscal year. That's question number one.
Okay, I'll tackle that. And Carly's on the line as well, if she needs to step in, but we developed a hiring plan for the current fiscal year, looking at all of our vacancies and prioritizing them. So we've had the last few months, we've had a significant emphasis.
Wait. I'm only talking about the HR staff because.
Oh, I follow you.
Yeah, when you look at the fact that we're, 6 positions, a third of the new positions are HR, and we got 30 projected vacancies coming up during the year. That means about 49 positions have to be filled. And I was wondering, had you started the 2 supervisors and the 4 staff in HR that's in the budget, had you already started recruiting them or going through whatever the process is instead of waiting until July 1st and starting the process?
So yes and no. I mean, we're not as far as we'd like to be, but we have definitely started the planning process. We have been looking at transfers to try to, from the county, to try to get additional resources in place more quickly while we develop an exam. So we are in the early stages of the planning where we are looking at the skills and abilities and the position descriptions and the job analysis that needs to be done to make sure that when we do our recruitment, we are very clear about what we need and what we're seeking. So that process has started in terms of a needs analysis, but we haven't started advertising yet. We just haven't gotten that far yet. But we have been, and so far unsuccessfully, attempting to recruit from LA County as transfer opportunities, because that would be a faster way for us to fulfill our needs. So
that's what I want to know. If you're going after those positions now instead of waiting so that you'll have them in place as soon as possible. Okay, that's good. Second question was about testing requirements. Or you have to create a list or eligibility list or something like that. And are we in control of creating that list for the positions that we need? Or are we dependent on waiting for the county's cycle of testing and then we can go into the list that they created? And if we can't find anybody, we got to wait until the next list comes around, which will be at the county's schedule instead of ours.
We have a little bit more flexibility. So we do follow civil service process, and we do follow this the county's guidelines for developing exams and administering them. But we do have greater control in terms of developing our own. We do develop our own exams and our own processes. So our director of HR has a little bit more responsibility than some of her county counterparts in other divisions.
Okay.
With that regard.
Yeah, more reason we need to get that staffing as soon as possible. Okay.
Exactly,
Right.
because we have a lot of the constraints, but we don't necessarily have the county resources. But we also don't have to rely on the county's priorities. We can use our own priorities. So it's, it's a mixed bag in terms of what that means for us.
Okay, and then the last question I had was, I was reading in the HR budget that you had a number of intern applications, but I guess they didn't meet some criteria or something happened and you didn't get the number you wanted, so you're going to go out a second time for interns. And I wanted to know that what the problem was initially and how it's solved so it doesn't happen again.
For that, I'm going to refer to Ms. Natoya to talk about that, our internship program and what we learned in the last year.
Okay.
Great. Good morning, and thank you for the question. The first round of recruiting, we had a lot of applicants, so the quantity was there. We did not find that the people who applied, the students that applied, had the right types of either experience or affinity for the positions that we wanted to fill. Right. So the second time around, we created, our partners at the communications division created a great brochure that we were able to send out to more targeted contacts, right? So we looked a little bit, we read it more like a recruitment that we usually typically do. So we look for affinity programs and send it directly to their career or placement counselors. We look for programs that are feeders into certain industries and send them directly to those counselors or placement professionals. The first round, we took a broader approach, and we just sent it out to a lot of universities, a lot of county affiliate programs. And I don't think that we got exactly the type of intern candidate we were looking for. The second round of recruiting is still in process. We might find better candidates by the time the summer rolls around to hire starting in summer, June, July, for the rest of the year, but we're still recruiting. We are still accepting qualified intern candidates.
Right. And Mr. Moore, the interns that we're talking about are for the pension administration side. I know that that Mr. Grable has a pretty robust internship program that he's expecting to have a number of interns in his shop.
Right. Okay, that's all I wanted to know. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I don't know if Joe or Keith had their hand up first, but
Joe did.
The retired person got his hand up first. I had first I wanted to thank staff very much for all their hard work in getting us to this point, because I know you still don't have a budget system and a lot of this work is manual, so I appreciate it. I had a question for Laura, which is, this is your first budget process or cycle at LACERA. What were your first impressions of it?
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I've been really amazed at the budget team and how well they are able to function with, just the tools of Excel. That's all they have. It's a very manual process. And I think that, they're amazing. They're just incredibly hardworking and very responsive. And also, I think our division managers are really hamstrung by not having a budget system. It's very difficult for them to have all of the information, and for the management team, frankly, to have all of the information to make the best decisions. So we have to make decisions with some kind of stale data, or not, and because our actuals are kind of unknown at the time we're developing our needs for the next year. So I think in short, I think the team does a really great job with the resources that it has, but I'm also really excited and optimistic about our ability to have better management decisions, have decisions that are based on data, metrics and KPIs, and have better, not just the development of the budget, but the budget control aspect of it. So you do a budget, you develop a budget, and then you need to kind of monitor your expenditures to make sure you're staying within the budget and that your expenditures are appropriate. And I think we do a good job here at LACERA of making sure our expenditures are appropriate. But it's difficult for folks to really plan without the proper tools. So I think I'm really excited about, as we implement the new budget system, and the tools that allows us. So I hope that answers your question. So I've been, I guess I was surprised coming into LACERA that we didn't have those tools in place, but really impressed with how staff have been able to function with what they have.
Okay, and thank you for that. And then I would just offer a comment, which is, I was in government a long time, and I don't remember ever achieving a vacancy rate of under 10%. I say that because I know you mentioned single digit. I think 10 to 12 is good, and I think it's pretty static or pretty common, I should say. but I've never seen one 987. Just didn't
It's a
happen.
struggle.
There's just life happens, right? Life happens, and it ends up over time giving you a 10 to 12% vacancy rate. Is what I saw. So I just shared that.
Well, I appreciate that. I think also, all of government has really suffered. It's definitely been my experience outside of LACERA too, that over the last 2 years, these high vacancy rates have been exacerbated by a lot of people leaving the workforce because of an aging staff and not as many people coming into government. And our slowness in hiring. It used to be that everybody was fairly slow in hiring, and so government wasn't that big of a deal, or people were willing to wait for the job. Today, we're competing with private industry that's a lot more nimble, but they also, we still want to uphold the tenets of a civil service system for that meritocracy and that fairness, so that we're not just hiring Laura's, brother-in-law, and that's really important, and an important tenet that we need to hold, but it definitely slows us down.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again.
Thank you. Trustee Knox?
Thank you. Good morning. Certainly appreciate staff echo the comments of the other trustees. I know how much work goes into this, so it is appreciated. Following up on Trustee Kelly's comment, Ms. Guglielmo, on the vacancy rate, I wanted to get clarity on something you said during your presentation, which was something like, and maybe I misheard, but it sounded like you said that you were hoping you'll be allowed to fill all your vacancies. And I know on the county side, I have vacancies that I purposely keep. I have positions I purposely keep vacant so I can balance my budget. LACERA doesn't have those same budget constraints, so I was confused by that, unless I misheard it.
I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. I've experienced your problem, having to maintain vacant positions in order to stay within my budget. We are very lucky at LACERA not to have to do that. But if what I was trying to express is, if we the increase that we're proposing for salaries is a lot. But if we don't have that flexibility, we could find ourselves in that situation where we have to hold positions that we might have the ability to fill, except if we don't have the resources, then we can't. So we want to make sure that we have enough flexibility in our budget so that we don't have those constraints, that we can go full board and hire as many people as we possibly can of our vacant positions, authorized positions, and not be constrained by budget limitations. So that was my intent to communicate, and apparently I didn't do it well. So I appreciate the opportunity to clarify.
No problem, thank you. And then a follow-up for Mr. Kryman. I've been going through the NACD cybersecurity training, and one of the best practices they refer to several times is budgeting for cybersecurity and investing in these risk assessments, risk mitigation, tabletop exercises. Will LACERA get to a point, and I know our IT is in a bit of a flux still, will we get to a point where we have budgeted line items for cybersecurity investments and expenses?
Yes, we do intend on getting there. With the new budget system, we'll be able to track things a little bit with more precision. We have made a pretty significant investment in the IT security arena this fiscal year, as well as the previous year, in terms of putting the InfoSec team together. We now, for example, do contract and have 24/7 monitoring of our systems. We're also moving into the cloud-based computing more, and so we have a perimeter security as well as the endpoint security that Bob has instituted, and his team are doing a good job of making sure that our data is safe and secure. I do expect to continue making investments in the IT InfoSec arena. It's an ongoing battle. Bob and his team are always defending the castle, so to speak. against perpetrators or cyber attackers and so on and so forth. And so it is on our focus. And the other thing also that I like about the direction we're going is that we also vet all of the vendors that are coming into LACERA from an InfoSec perspective. And so that's an added layer of security that I think we needed to do, and we're often running in that direction as well. So did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I echoing what Mr. Moore said earlier, as the your information evolves as you're presenting this over the next year or so, I think it would be very informative to, if nothing else, see a slide where it lays out what some of those cybersecurity investments are. If it's not just going to be some specific line item. So again, thank you. Appreciate all the work that went into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Knox. Trustee Jones.
Good morning. Thank you to staff for a very thorough and informative presentation. Not only did I enjoy, going through the PowerPoint presentation, but also looking at the details of the budget document and getting more familiar with LACERA. Being new to the board, I appreciate all the information that I can receive to help me, get more educated and understand the flow of LACERA and the operating budget. So thank you very much for that. I do want to, echo what everyone has been saying about vacancies. I too, and I work in a city, and we communicate with many cities in our neighboring areas who are experiencing the same challenges. So I did appreciate the portion where you talked about your plans for hiring. I did have a question in regards to the budget. I support all the new positions that you're proposing. I do see where they're needed, but obviously in budgeting for those positions, there will be somewhat of a vacancy factor, right? Because it will take some time to get those positions filled. And then I also know you've budgeted for temporary help is also to possibly assist in the bridge. You need some temporary help until you can hire permanent employees. So I was just wondering if anywhere in the budget there's more like a vacancy factor or some way of accounting for the fact that a good portion of the year is possible, you're going to have quite a bit of vacant positions.
I'd be happy to tackle that. So in my experience, prior to joining LACERA, we would apply a salary savings rate as a percentage, right? And I think that's kind of where you're coming for. Do we do that? At LACERA, we don't do it that way. If you drill down into the division budgets, it shows the vacant positions. And so positions that are vacant today and that we do not anticipate filling before June 30th because there's no list and we don't anticipate having a list by June 30th, we don't assume full year funding for. So that's how we really have the ability, being so small, to drill down into the actual staffing level. And so rather than applying a percentage, we look at what's actually vacant and what our likelihood of being able to fill that within what time period. So most of our vacant positions are assumed at 6 months, unless we have a hiring plan that we think we're able to do it sooner than that.
Thank you. My other question in relationship to that, I do appreciate the schedule that you provided as well that gives us projections for the current year versus the budget for the current year and then looking forward to next year's budget. So I do appreciate that information. I do see you anticipate having a huge amount of savings, and I do understand it's from vacancies. But what happens to that budget at year end?
That's a great question because it is different than what you are experiencing in your city. So typically for municipalities, it goes back to the general fund, right? Or the original source of funds. So in this case, our source of funds is the pension trust fund. So those funds go back to the fund to be invested. So we are limited on how much we can appropriate. That's our budget policy under SERL.
Right.
Anything we don't use, we don't have to appropriate the whole amount, and we don't. And then anything that isn't expended just goes back to the fund. So there's no, our incentive is that we want to have enough flexibility to purchase and procure all of the goods and services and people that are necessary to do the work, but nothing that's unnecessary, right? That's our responsibility. So we want to make sure we preserve as much of those trust funds as possible that can be reinvested and make money for the system to provide those benefits. So we try to keep our administrative costs under control from that perspective. But yeah, they just go back to the fund.
Okay.
We don't get to, keep anything.
Right.
But also it doesn't go back to the plan sponsor or anything like that. It stays within the trust.
Got it. I have more questions. Now moving into the IT, I'm very impressed with all of the IT projects. I also share with everyone's appreciation for completing this document from Excel. I've spent many years in that space. You do what you have to do. So I'm really excited about the projects that you guys are bringing forward in the IT area. But a budgeting question in relationship to that, I think it's great. It looks like there's going to be an investment of about 1.9 million this year, coming year, for many of the projects that are listed. And I think they're all great projects. What happens if you can't finish all these projects? Because obviously I'm aware of this vacancy factor having a huge part in how quickly you can move on implementing a lot of the projects that are listed in IT. I couldn't imagine trying to do all those projects now with 20+% of a vacancy factor. So I was just curious, will those funds be protected if you're not complete by year end? What is the process?
I'm gonna take a stab at this, and we do have Kathy Delino here from our systems division to help us. But typically, you're right, we get a little ambitious in our desire to do as much as possible, and Kathy and the IT team do an amazing job. We do rely a lot on right now on outside help so that we can fulfill those commitments. And we are working, we have a number of IT vacancies, and HR is working to try to fill those with permanent staff so that, because we do know that this is, that we have to keep the technology train moving, right? And, you stop and you die. So we need to just kind of keep things moving constantly, improving, constantly looking at more efficient and better ways and modern ways of doing our work. And so to the extent our projects don't quite get finished on time, it may delay a future project. So we have certain projects that, that are started this fiscal year that we had hoped to finish this fiscal year that we now think will end next fiscal year. If that may cause other projects to have a delay, if that happens. So it would just kind of be based on the priorities of the organization. But we also have the ability to make adjustments in the mid-year. And so that's something we did this past year, is we did some mid-year adjustments related to technology to say, okay, well, we weren't able to do certain things, or certain things were planned for the prior year that we're actually going to fulfill this year. They weren't budgeted because they were in the prior year. What savings do we have? Either by projects that we don't think we'll get to, or we had in the current year, for example, savings related to some of our cloud migration. So we had costs that we were no longer going to have to incur, which is the best of that situation to apply. So the budget's not a static process. So it's our plan, and then we'll continue to evaluate the plan and make adjustments as necessary. So we will have a mid-year process that we can come to the board to make adjustments as necessary. And also, sort of on our monthly reporting, we tell you, board members, about the status of our IT project. So you have a sense of how well we're doing according to the plan. If that answers your question, if not.
No, it does.
I've
It
got
does.
Kathy and Semi, our experts here, who will happily go into more detail.
If I could add to that, I did want to add, Trustee Jones, that we have recently established the project management office within systems. And the goal of that office is to take these new initiatives and see them through. They're not derailed by operational issues. And so they do keep moving ahead. And we have staffed that group with a combination of contractors and permanent staff. So that group is fully staffed at this time. And hopefully, we can fill those positions with permanent staff over the next year.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I do have a few more questions. And one is kind of related to IT as well. Does LACERA ever do like a 5-year spending plan, or at least, come up with projects that they would like to complete over the next 5 years? Just so there's a vision for the trustees, so we see ahead that these are things that you want to accomplish.
So if I can, Trustee Jones. So we're in the midst of strategic planning, and we anticipate, in collaboration with our board, is one of the pillars will be modernizing a lot of our operations, and within that, we will have a roadmap in terms of some of the initiatives that we're going to be undertaking. Some of them are underway now, like case management, that's in phase 1, but you'll see some of the other areas that we want to focus on throughout the organization.
Yeah,
if I could add, I think, sorry, Mr. Crimey, did you want to?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that LACERA has an internal information technology coordination committee that allows staff to bring forward ideas for technology improvements. Those are vetted through a process, discussed what the implication is, what resources would be available, what the timing is. And that's a process to ensure that there is a mechanism that that ideas and concepts can have a voice, and we do it in a real formal process. And that ensures that we are constantly thinking about the future, even if we can't get to it right away. We know sort of what the anticipated needs are going forward, and I think that process really will help us as we go through this strategic planning process of what we've already started to think about. But it will evolve, and so something we think we need today, we may decide as we do other improvements that maybe that's not as important anymore. Other technology has come in and replaced that. So you have to remain very, very nimble.
Oh, great. I look forward to reviewing that and being a part of that process. Thank you. Just two more questions. One is a technical questions. For my edification, on page 185 of the budget document, and I just wanted to show you that I actually got that far on the budget document. So this is a projected non-administrative expenses. And this is I just wanted some clarification. It looks like we have amounts for the prior year in 2021. So we had a total expense under total other expenses of 152 million. However, it's projected to go up to 222 million in 2023. And it looks like the main factor is performance and other fees. And I was just curious what is made up of that amount. It's shown as other fees. And that's something you could certainly get back to me on if you need to. It's really just for my understanding.
I think Ted would be able to answer that particular question, or Chief Financial Officer. Ted?
Yes, hi, good morning. So yeah, on that is the chart of our non-administrative expenses. I believe that's the page we're talking about. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So essentially, just a couple of quick comments. This is really our investment expenses. These are expenses related to making pension fund investments. On this chart, we include the investment management fees, the consulting fees, and the custodial bank services, actuarial services, and legal services. That's primarily focused on the pension fund, sort of the top half of the chart. The bottom half, we include our RHC program, as well as our OPEB trust. So the line item, apologize for the long answer. The line item you're referring to, performance and other fees, what we're including there is the carried interest paid on private equity investments. So it's a bit of a significant number because we have a significant private equity investment portfolio. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's several $billion. And this is where we're capturing those sort of carried interest or profit fees, if you will, in that line item.
I understand. Thank you. If there is a detail or breakdown of that amount that could be shared with me, I'd like to just see that if possible.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
I understand what you're referring to. I got it completely.
Okay.
And then I guess my final question, I don't know if it's really a question, it's probably back to Laura. And, since you guys are in the process of developing a budget software, it would be nice to see within the budget the adjusted budget for the prior year. It looks like you have the adopted budget for comparisons, but as you indicated during mid-year, you sometimes make changes to the budget. And if I'm missing it, please let me know, but I did not see where we compare the adjusted budget to the, the budget we'd like to present in 2023.
We can certainly include that in future budgets. I think that I don't believe that as part of our mid-year we ask for additional appropriation. We basically move things between
just move it
categories,
around.
right? So, but we'll figure out. Let us think about how we can do that with the new budget system, and we'll keep that in mind when we start developing it to make sure that we show you the differences between the adopted, the adjusted, the mid-year adjusted, and then the final budget, or at least estimated actuals. Okay.
Yeah, only if the new software allows for that. It would be nice to see the historical pattern. We started with this, we adopted this, we made some movement throughout the year. This is where we ended, and then this is where we're going next year. It gives a little bit more of a story. Okay. But other than that, thank you very much. Like as I said, I have learned quite a lot. So this has been very informative. I think that, and I've looked at budgets for 20 plus years, although I'm only 25 and holding. I think that the budget is put together very well. I think that the request, this is just, my personal input, that the requests are very reasonable as we move forward next year. And I share in the pain that you're going through with your vacancies. I tremendously understand, and I'm hopeful for all of us, but I'm not sure how we're going to turn out for next year. We're all ambitious. We've added new positions. We've said this is what we need. Let's all hope that when we go out there to the job market, we're able to recruit the necessary positions, the necessary people for the positions. And if you're not successful, I guess, just as, I will have to, at my agency, we'll have to look at what are the next steps, what other things will have to be brought forward to fill those positions, because, you know, I definitely understand how important it is to at least lower the vacancy rate, as I think Trustee Kelly said, at least get it down to 10%. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Trustee Jones. And I would say, if you have ideas for that, based on what you're doing in your city, we would love to collaborate with you. And any other trustees for that matter.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you, Trustee Jones and Trustee Kelly.
Thank you. I'm reminded of the speaker we had at a committee meeting at Board of Investments last week, who said, if we want inflation to go down, we need the unemployment rate to go up. So maybe that'll help. But my question was, I interpreted many of Ms. Trustee Jones's questions related to encumbrance accounting. It's a technical question, but my recollection is that LACERA does not practice encumbrance accounting. It has not adopted encumbrance accounting. And I can't remember why that is. I mean, by encumbrance accounting, I mean that you would, for these projects, these IT projects, you would, if it's $1.9 million, you would encumber $1.9 million, even though you're not going to spend it in that 1 year. You spend over several years, but you've encumbered it. And so it's available to you and no one else can take it. And this issue came up several years ago with a communications issue in the communications division, because they had overpaid a printer. And I said, well, how can you overpay a printer when the contract was for $1 million? You couldn't, the encumbrance accounting protocols would not allow you to spend more than $1 million. And the answer was, we don't practice encumbrance accounting. And I'm just, Ms. Trustee Jones's questions made me think, well, why was that? Why is that? And I can't remember the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer to that question in terms of historical, maybe Ted or.
Yes, the county does. Ted, do you know?
Yeah, well, we don't, but I think the county is a little different, because I think it's the notion that one board can't constrain the other board, a future board. And so the county, when they have a $5 million contract over a 3-year period, they have to appropriate, for that total amount. So, and then of course it becomes a commitment, and then you draw down on the commitment, and then the county CEO is always banging on you about canceling your commitment, so the money will go back to the general fund.
Right.
So we haven't had that conversation. I know that JJ and I had the conversation when I first got here, because I was surprised that we don't do encumbrance accounting. But I believe it's really the source of funds. The county, my personal belief is that LACERA benefits from the investments of those monies, and we'd like to invest it longer as opposed to keep it in cash when we need it. I think the limited staff, quite frankly, to do encumbrance accounting will require a lot more resources on the budget side, as well as the fiscal side of the equation. And so, but we can certainly look at that. But the cash and reappropriating every year seems to work best for this organization, at least.
The downside is what we saw in that one instance, which is you overpay a vendor. And that could be material, but I don't remember it being. I thought there was a very technical answer to the question. I don't remember it being any of the things that you mentioned, Santos. I just can't remember because I'm getting older.
Well,
JJ?
if I may, from my memory, because I believe I asked about it at one point, because we had projects that go over years. It was really a management type of decision that we didn't want to pursue that at the time. And that may be because, quite honestly, we didn't have the facilities to do that with, the way that we use Excel to budget everything, and it would be quite difficult to track. But I don't know of any technical reason other than ability to do it well that would constrain us from doing it.
I think one of the things that we did, Trustee Kelly, is we instituted a mid-year budget adjustment cycle, just to make sure that we're, reallocating resources properly, and that the board understands where we are at any given point in time. We do it generally at the end of the calendar year, sometime in November or December, but we can certainly do it more often. But as the CEO, I actually prefer the cash basis the way we're doing it now. It just provides more flexibility. And I think to the trustees' credit, when that issue came in terms of the overpayment, the management team went into hyper mode and began putting policies and procedures in place to prevent that from happening. And so we have, the new contracting policy, for example, was approved by the board. And so they have more checks and balances at this point in time than they did before.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Mr. Moore?
Can I ask a couple of quick comments?
Go ahead,
Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, so Searle requires that LACERA use a US GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. Searle does not require LACERA to use government-based accounting. So we don't do that. In fact, we use accrual-based accounting, sort of regular accrual-based accounting. We don't use cash-based accounting. Again, regular accrual-based accounting. We kind of look a lot like an enterprise fund at the county. Admittedly, I'm not an enterprise fund expert, but we sort of generate revenue. We generate our own revenue, which we use to create a budget and administer the fund. And finally, I guess the last point is just that we don't use, we don't use government accounting at LACERA because we're simply not required to. So it makes our lives in accounting a little bit more simple. I think we're starting to introduce some of the terms in our budgeting, some of the government type terms. And I think that's fine, as long as we're clear and as long as everybody understands, that the accounting side is regular GAAP, accrual-based GAAP, accrual-based GAAP. And, we have a budget process as well.
So Ted, so you're saying that encumbrance accounting equals government accounting?
In my limited experience with government accounting, yes.
Okay, and then does Searle prohibit the use of government accounting? You say it requires GAAP, but does it prohibit use of government accounting?
I don't know that it specifically calls that out. I would probably have to defer to Steve to help me determine that, but I've read the requirement a couple of times, and it specifically calls us to for LACERA to prepare its statements under GAAP principles.
Well, you would do one or the other. You wouldn't do both. So
that's right.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Jones, for all your questions. They were great.
Trustee Jones or Trustee Moore, I believe you had your hand up before.
I just want to generally comment that the encumbrance accounting pathway is more complex. And one of the reasons I think it's used is because in local governments, you have multiple sources of funds that are only eligible for specific uses, and specific departments are authorized to use those funds. And when you have the general fund, you have multiple programs and activities that are competing for those funds. And so you have to have a much stronger way to control who gets what money and how long they have it and what they can use it for. So we don't have any of those issues. So to put a layer of complexity over top of how we operate just wouldn't make sense, which is why it's not required. It's just general comment. So
thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, for that.
Trustee Jones?
Yes, but I did want to just get some clarification to Trustee Kelly's concern. I'm assuming, I understand the encumbrance accounting and the difference between the government accounting and the fact that LACERA follows GAAP. However, I'm sure, or I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth, but I'm assuming that in the AP system, there is some way of verifying if you're about to go over budget so that you're staying within budget for your transactions. I know encumbrance accounting allows for that. It's by default. You can't go over, once you've encumbered the funds, you can only spend what's encumbered. But I'm assuming that there's some other system in the GL that you use that helps monitor that so that you don't go over budget. Is that correct?
Ted?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you, Ms. Jones, for the question. Yes, I think we have 2 layers of control, well, possibly even 3 layers of control. So first, we have the division managers that are responsible for monitoring their contracts, monitoring their invoices, their payments to their vendors. Then the payment requests would go through our budget unit, and they would do a check on the vendors and the amounts and whether there's a budget for that. And then it also would circle through our records inventory management, or RIM, or contracting unit. And they also look at the controls and make sure that we're not overpaying those particular vendors. And then finally, it comes to accounting, where we look for duplicate payments. So I think we have a pretty good control system in place in our current process. And then in addition, we are, as we're building these new systems with our AP and our budget contracts monitoring system, we're also looking to build those controls into those new systems as well.
Right.
Understood. Yeah, I think it's great, you know, when you have the layers of the approvals, but adding the system as a part of that catch-all is also really important. So yeah, if your new system can allow for that type of monitoring as you go through the AP right before you cut the check, I think that would be, you know, just like icing on the cake.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other hands up. So, Louis, did you want to make a final comment, or?
Yeah, no, yeah, final comment in terms of just the trustee feedback. We really appreciate it. I think it speaks to kind of some of the evolution, especially within our budget environment. You know, and I just want to highlight, Laura had mentioned this with the budget system and Ted with the AP system. I think those are some of the things that we want to reconcile, Trustee Jones and Trustee Kelly and others, and Trustee Moore that made those comments in terms of making sure we have good controls over our projects and our spending. And that's ultimately, you know, kind of the end state what we want to get to. I do want to reiterate the comments made earlier in terms of our budget team. Kevin and Kaylin did a tremendous job, and as you can see, a lot of manual effort with Excel, but did a tremendous job working with our division managers collaboratively. And again, you know, want to acknowledge our division managers for combing through their budgets and bringing, you know, an adequate proposal to us. So with that, appreciate the comments. I did take notes, so we'll definitely heed some of the feedback and improve some of our processes as we evolve and move forward.
Yes.
With that, I don't know if there's no other questions. I don't know if we adjourn the meeting or what the.
I think the only thing that I want to say is that ultimately our budget, the budget that we put together is to help us support the investment division and support the operation units to provide the services that our members deserve, quite frankly. And so ultimately, all of the decisions and requests are to do just that and to meet the mission of the office to the best of our abilities. And so we appreciate the trustees taking an interest in the budget. We appreciate all of the feedback that we received from you all. And with that, I think that
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. I was just about to ask that.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.